People often ask me what's the weirdest case I ever worked on. After all, they always say you can't work on the drug squad for 20 years and not have stories to tell. You must have seen it all and have dirt on virtually everyone. Honestly, they're probably at least half right. I definitely have enough strange stories from my time on the job to fill several books. I definitely have provable concrete dirt on a whole bunch of very influential people and enough rumor and hearsay to make it stick on plenty of others. Problem is, most of these people are influential enough to have some very powerful protectors. Connections that go higher or deeper than most would imagine, and which present themselves as immovable objects when it comes time to try and convict anyone. Sometimes what seems like the most open and shut case never reaches court because of who it might incriminate higher up the chain, and who they might talk about even further than that. You would not believe the number of easily winnable cases I have been forced to shelve, filing them away as cans of worms best left unopened. It's always that way with drugs, amongst other things. When it comes to the weirdest stories though, part of the reason I don't discuss it is because it seems so implausible. Technically, I'm not supposed to talk about who it involved, and seeing as I don't fancy spending any time behind bars with the clowns and cretins I've locked up over the years, I won't be naming any names or going into the kind of specifics that will get me in trouble. I can tell the story, but some of the characters will be blurred sketches at best. You can make your own guesses as to who they might be. What a lot of people don't appreciate about police work is just how invaluable informants are. TV has folks believing that we spend most of our time looking at notice boards crisscrossed with red string and photos of suspects, that every detective carries a magnifying glass, and that through careful deduction and ridiculous intellect, we solve every case like it was a Sherlock Holmes mystery. In reality, most of the time, we crack cases and work out who the bad guys are because someone squeals. It's not that we find the clues, it's that we are given them. We know who to arrest or where to look for because someone tells us where to look. An informant. During my time on the force, I must have had over 20 informants. Some were better than others and some were fantastic. For a few quid, which usually went to feed their own drug habits, leniency on some small misdemeanors, or as revenge for some perceived slight, informants would give you the ins and outs of entire operations, sometimes providing the key piece in a jigsaw that helped you crack a case wide open. Other times, they just put you on the trail, gave you the first breadcrumb, and left you to follow the rest yourself. This was one of those cases. Archie Clark was a drug addict and informant who worked for me on and off for the better part of 10 years. He was a skinny, shifty-looking fella with the kind of eyes that just never seemed to stay still, constantly darting around, observing and taking everything in. When he wasn't high as a kite, Archie was a brilliant informant because he remembered things down to the tiniest detail. Usually, if I needed some specific information, I would call Archie up or find him in one of his usual haunts and set him to the task of finding out as much as he could. On this occasion, though, he came to me. Waiting outside the station for me to leave at the end of my shift, he motioned to me with the nod of the head that he would meet me in the car park as he often did, would join me for a short ride whilst he told me what he had to say. Archie's logic was that if he sat in the backseat behind me with his hood up, then nobody would recognize him and he wouldn't be seen on any CCTV cameras or by passers-by conversing with me. I understood this code perfectly, and 10 minutes later was driving out of the car park with Archie huddled in the backseat behind me, the collar of his tracksuit pulled up to his nose and his hood pulled down as far as it would go. As often happened in these conversations, I essentially spoke to Archie's eyes reflected in the rearview mirror as I drove. Once he'd finished telling me what he had to say, I would drive back into the car park and let him out in a spot where there were no cameras and let him slink away. "So what have you got for me this evening, Mr. Clark?" I asked, only momentarily taking my eyes off the road to glance at Archie's disheveled form in the rear view. The streets outside were dark, and in some ways the image of Archie, the silhouette of a hooded figure illuminated only by orange glow of the street lights, as they dipped and slid over him with every turn made for an imposing sight. like something from one of those urban myths where a guy with a hook for a hand or a huge axe pops up on the back seat. To anyone actually watching the event unfold, it would have looked mighty strange, especially considering how clearly terrified Archie was. Over the course of the next 15 minutes, Archie explained how he had been hired by a guy named Terrence Lott to make a delivery. Lott was a known player in the area and man who I can name on account of how I put him behind bars a few years later for a string of murders. At the time, I'll admit that the mention of his name excited my professional ambition, but made me a little scared for Archie's safety. When I asked what kind of delivery he was supposed to be making, where and how, Archie hesitated before asking if he could open the window to get some air. Obviously, I said that was fine, and after some deep breaths, which he seemed to gulp down like he was swallowing a liquid, he went on. He explained that he was taking a box, filled with something he never knew what, to an abandoned house on the Marston estate close to the town of Morton. The box was given to him a week ago, and he had kept it in an abandoned garage under the railway arches where he and another guy were squatting. When I asked how big this box was, Archie motioned to a size about that of an average briefcase. I nodded, reflecting upon how this did not seem like a large quantity of whatever substance it was likely to be. I reeled off the names of different drugs to see if Archie had been clued into the contents. Doesn't sound like much, I remember saying to him. I mean, a box that size, no matter what drug it's holding, it will make a good bust, but it sounds like small fry for a guy like Lott, especially if he's going to have you go all the way out from the city to Morton. Doesn't seem worth it. I considered this for a moment before a shift occurred in my thinking. What if, I asked myself, it wasn't drugs at all? A dealer of Lott's stature might have moved into other commodities. I put this idea to Archie, who shook his head furiously, like a dog trying to shake itself dry.
It's not drugs. Definitely not.
He sputtered firmly. He hesitated for a moment, then, leaning forward so that he was gripping the headrest of my seat, his head appeared between the gaps in the seat so that it was almost in line with my own, he added,
I'm not supposed to use anything on the day of the delivery because Lott wants me to drive the van back. He showed me a photo of the van and the back filled from top to bottom with boxes. When I asked him what was in the van, he showed me another photo of an open box. It was full with money. Notes. Like more notes than I've ever seen in one place. I don't know if it's counterfeit like fake notes or whatever, but if every one of them boxes has that many notes in it, you're talking multi-millions in the back. Lott wants me to hand over the box, then drive the van that the other guys are gonna give as payment back to the city. That's why I've got to be sober, at least that morning. If I get pulled over, I've had it. But that's also how I know it's not drugs. No drug is worth that amount of money.
I nodded, already planning the interception of the van with the boxes full of cash in my head and trying to work out how we were going to link it back to Lott without dropping Archie in the muck. In my mind's eye, I had visions of the box being opened to reveal a briefcase lined with velvet, inside of which would be illegally smuggled precious stones. What else could be being exchanged that would be worth that much money?
There's another thing, though,
Archie whispered quietly.
That box. I don't know. There's something wrong with it.
Wrong with it, I echoed, hoping to God that Archie hadn't dropped it or damaged it in some way. He assured me that he hadn't and went on.
The box is fine. I mean, I haven't done anything to it or broken it open or whatever, but it's hard to explain. When I'm near it, I feel sick. Like physically sick and dirty. Like I've tar stuck to my skin or something. I noticed it when I was carrying it back from meeting Lott. At first, it was dogs barking at me, like more than usual when I walked past. But then I realized it wasn't just them. It was the people as well. I don't think they meant to do it or even knew. But if I got within like 3 steps of anyone, they would move away. Some folks crossed the street altogether. Some people stepped out into the road to avoid me. Now, I've been homeless enough times to know people sometimes want to give you a wide berth, but this was different. When I came to Market Street, it was like something out of the Bible. As I was walking, people just parted around me. You know how busy that street gets, but I'm telling you, they just split around me, like a boat going through a lake with the water just going around it. People were moving away, shunning me and looking at me disgusted, but without really knowing why. It's like they could just feel it. Anyway, I got back to the Arches, put the box in a space behind my bed and sat down to have something to eat. Bud had given me a few quid to keep me going until the job was done, and I'd been to the supermarket and bought myself a few bits. Only when I opened them up, they were all rotten. Fruit, butter, some sausages I bought. Everything that I bought that morning fresh was just black and sludgy, like it's been rotting away for months. I don't know, mate. There's something not right about that box. I keep worrying whether it's like one of those metals or radioactive things like an isotope or that stuff the Russians used to poison that fella.
I told him if that was the case, he'd be feeling far worse than just a little nauseous, and he seemed reassured. Still, he said,
I don't like being alone with it.
The following day, 20 officers, including myself, watched as the hateful box was handed over to 2 men in dark suits at an abandoned house on the Marston estate. We waited for the deal to be done, for Archie to drive off in the van filled with money and follow the vehicle of the men who had made the exchange. A few miles outside of Morton, we pulled the guys over and asked them to accompany us to the station. Though as soon as the car door opened, I became apprehensive about doing that. Remember when I said about cases going too far up the ladder? Well, in the car we stopped were, like some kind of bad joke, a member of Parliament, and so as not to identify him, what I'll refer to as a high-ranking official within the church. Despite who they were, the fact that I recognized them both and the inevitable fallout that would come with arresting them, we took the pair in for questioning. We also confiscated the box. I only saw the box open once, for a period of around 10 minutes. Inside it was not jewels, drugs, or any other item that might require a literal truckload of money to pay for it. Inside was a book. The volume, clearly many centuries old, was bound in some kind of leather, though I would not assume to guess what animal the hide came from, or if, in fact, it was animal at all. It reminded me of one of those old grimoires you see in films about wizards and things, like a spell book or something like that. Opening it up to flick through the pages revealed a mess of strange scripts, the likes of which I'd never seen before or since. On each page were diagrams, geometric shapes, and astrological charts, alongside what looked to me like alchemical symbols. There were also ink drawings of the most hideous creatures you can imagine. Dark things with multiple limbs, eyes that spread out in a fracture of lenses like those of a spider, horned things with shaggy fur, intersecting with the lines of triangles and stars, scrawled onto the page many centuries earlier. I only looked through it for a minute. Whether it was the power of suggestion or something, I don't know. But almost as soon as I opened the damn thing, I felt like I wanted to vomit. I don't really use the word evil much, especially not in reference to inanimate objects. What I will say is this: something about that book was horribly, horribly wrong, and I don't just mean the price. I had planned to ensure that I photographed every page of the book before it was submitted to evidence, but I never got that far. Within an hour of the 2 men arriving at the station, the governor, the local mayor, and 2 even higher-ranking officials from the church had arrived at the station. There was a lot of shouting, wrangling, and angry contorted glances in my direction. After another hour, the 2 men were released without charge. An hour after that, 4 men, dressed in elaborate black and red robes as if they had just popped in from the Vatican, arrived, and after yet more wrangling, were allowed without any word of an explanation to walk into the evidence room, pick up the book, and walk off with it. On their way out the door, one turned to me and said, "I know you won't understand, but this is pretty much the equivalent of bomb disposal. This thing that we are taking, it's not good. You were very, very lucky today. If you are Catholic, I would recommend going to confession this evening and attending Mass as soon as you possibly can. If not, then please ensure that tonight you fast and wash yourself thoroughly, more thoroughly than you ever have. This thing, it stains." And with that, they left. I never heard anything about the book again, and no official record of the arrests, the operation, or my interaction with Archie ever found their way into the paperwork. The van Archie was driving was impounded and the cash collected. The guys who counted it told me that there was over £4 million in 20-pound notes stored in the back, though whatever happened to that money and who received it to keep their mouth shut, I'll never know. As for Archie himself, he drowned in the reservoir not 2 weeks after this incident. An eyewitness said that she had seen him standing up to his waist, scrubbing and scrubbing himself, crying, before eventually just walking out into the deep, making no attempt at all to swim. A friend of Archie's who had also acted as an informant for me said that he had gone up there to wash, saying over and over that he felt dirty and that he needed to get clean. He just kept saying it over and over. "I need to be clean. I need to get clean," the friend told me. Of course, for a drug addict, getting clean can mean a very particular thing. For Archie, however, I suspect it meant something else entirely.